Imagine the most famous shipwreck in history. You know the one. The ship they called completely unsinkable. Now, I want you to imagine for a second that it wasn't the Titanic at all. What if the ship sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic right now, the very one that took 1,500 lives, was actually a completely different vessel, deliberately sunk in this massive multi-million-dollar insurance scam? Okay, we're going to dive deep into this, because today in this explainer, we're breaking down one of the most elaborate, heavily debated conspiracy theories in modern history.
So the claim here is absolutely wild. The Titanic? It never sank. That's the core of a theory that people have been fiercely arguing about for over 100 years now. The idea is that a corporate mastermind swapped out the absolute pride of the White Star Line to cover up a catastrophic financial disaster. And the evidence for this? Well, honestly, it's actually way more compelling than you might think at first glance. We're going to put on our investigative hats, rip apart the evidence on both sides, and see exactly how deep this rabbit hole really goes.
All right, to really get this, we got to rewind a bit. Before the Titanic was even finished being built over in Belfast, its older sister ship, the RMS Olympic, was already out there sailing the ocean. And here is the perfect setup for a conspiracy. These two massive ocean liners were pretty much identical. Same class, same design, same imposing profile. I mean, to the untrained eye of just a regular passenger or a dock worker looking up from the outside, you literally couldn't tell the Olympic and the Titanic apart. But then, September 1911 rolls around. Just 7 months before the Titanic's famous maiden voyage, disaster strikes the older sister. The Olympic collides with the British warship, the HMS Hawke, right near the Isle of Wight. The warship's reinforced bow absolutely tore 2 massive gashes into the Olympic's side. The propeller shaft was completely twisted, the ship was taking on heavy water, and it barely limped back to port. And here comes the financial nightmare. The Admiralty Court actually blamed the White Star Line's Olympic for the crash. That meant their insurance wasn't going to pay out a single dime, leaving the companies stuck with astronomical repair bills for a severely crippled ship.
And right there, that absolute financial ruin, that is the dark motive behind the switch theory. Theorists argue that instead of scrapping a ruined, uninsured, multi-million-dollar ship, the company hatched this desperate, highly illegal plot. Since the two ships were sitting side by side at the Harland and Wolff shipyard anyway, they just quietly swapped them, changed the names on the bow, swapped the hull numbers, switched the lifeboat markings. The grand plan was to send the broken Olympic out to sea, disguised as the brand new Titanic, deliberately sink it, and collect the massive insurance policy on the pristine, newly insured vessel.
I know, it sounds totally unhinged, right? But theorists point to this startling laundry list of anomalies. First off, they claim that photographs of the Titanic's hull right before departure actually show traces of the word Olympic bleeding through the fresh paint. Then there were these sudden, completely unexplained crew transfers right before the ship sailed. And it gets weirder. The ship's lookouts didn't even have binoculars. They were locked in a cabinet, and the one single officer with the key was mysteriously transferred off the ship at the very last second. When you stack all this up, it starts to feel a lot less like a string of bad luck and way more like a carefully orchestrated event. But the most glaring red flag of them all centers around one guy, J.P. Morgan, the American billionaire financier who ultimately controlled the whole White Star Line. Morgan had this incredibly luxurious private suite booked for the maiden voyage, complete with specially designed cigar holders in his private bath. He was deeply invested in this, but at the absolute last minute, he abruptly cancels, claiming he's terribly ill. Yet reporters found him shortly after, hanging out at a French resort, enjoying morning massages and sulfur baths. When the literal owner of the ship suddenly bails right before the voyage, yeah, people are going to ask questions. And the anomalies don't stop there. They all kind of culminate in one of the most famous pieces of alleged evidence in this entire conspiracy: the mysterious case of the ship's windows. For decades, theorists have claimed there was undeniable, photographic proof of the swap sitting in plain sight right on the side of the ship. Now, we are going to open a loop on that right now because we're going to investigate that supposed physical evidence in just a moment. But first, think about it. If you're going to sink a massive ocean liner for a payout, you need a highly controlled plan. The sabotage theory basically outlines it like a controlled demolition. You sail the damaged Olympic, disguised as the Titanic, directly into a known ice field at night. You cause a fatal blow to the hull, but here is the catch. Another vessel, the SS Californian, was supposedly ordered to sit nearby in the dark, just waiting.
The plan was for the Californian to rush in, safely rescue all the passengers so nobody actually dies, and let the broken ship sink. The White Star Line cashes a massive check, and the whole shebang ends with everyone going home safely.
Except, well, we all know that isn't what happened. The sabotage theory claims this controlled demolition went horribly, tragically wrong. The SS California was stationed nearby, yes, but its radio was turned off for the night. The Titanic fired off distress rockets, but they were supposedly the wrong color, white, instead of the standard emergency red. So the rescue never came in time. And because of this incredibly botched insurance scam, 1,500 innocent people paid the ultimate price.
It's a captivating, terrifying narrative, isn't it? It's got motives, masterminds, a tragic twist. But we need to hit the brakes right here, because in this explainer, we don't just look at the wild claims, we rip them apart. When we start pulling on the threads of this grand conspiracy, we really have to ask the hard question. Does any of this physical evidence actually hold up to basic historical and logistical scrutiny?
Let's start with the interiors. Conspiracy theorists love to say the ships were identical. And from a distance, sure, absolutely. But inside, they were completely different. The Titanic had these unique private promenades, a massively expanded first-class dining saloon, and the famous Café Parisien. The Olympic absolutely did not have those features. To swap them, you wouldn't just be painting a new name on the outside of the hull. You would have to completely gut and rebuild the inside of a massive luxury liner. Hundreds of crew members knew every single inch of both ships. Are we really supposed to believe that not one of them would instantly notice their entire workplace had magically changed overnight?
And that brings us to the sheer logistical absurdity of the timeline here. The Olympic arrived in Belfast for minor repairs on March 1, 1912. The Titanic left Belfast for sea trials on April 2nd. That is a window of roughly 30 days. Listen, you cannot secretly rebuild, redesign, and repaint two 882-foot ocean liners in a bustling shipyard filled with thousands of workers in just a month. It is physically impossible to execute a cover-up of that massive scale without a single dock worker, carpenter, or engineer noticing something and speaking out.
Then there's the economic flaw. As maritime historians are quick to point out, the real Olympic, the supposedly broken, worthless ship in this theory, went on to sail profitably for another 24 years. It served in World War I, it safely carried millions of passengers, and it made the White Star Line an absolute fortune. Sinking a highly functional, revenue-generating ship for a one-time insurance payout, that's just a terrible business move. And say what you will about JP Morgan, the guy was a lot of things, but he was for sure not bad at making money.
But look, if you want the ultimate, undeniable physical smoking gun, here it is. 401. When Dr. Robert Ballard finally discovered the actual wreck of the Titanic down there in 1985, they examined the debris. Every single ship built at Harland and Wolff was given a specific yard number. The Olympic was 400, the Titanic was 401. And stamped right there into the massive steel propeller sitting at the bottom of the ocean was the number 401. The rivet patterns, the hull plating, the physical steel resting in the dark down there, it all perfectly matches the Titanic's unique original build specifications.
Which finally brings us back to those windows, the supposed undeniable proof we talked about earlier. Theorists looked at a photo of the Titanic and saw the Olympic's evenly spaced window pattern, claiming, aha, it proves the switch. The reality, that photograph was simply taken super early in the Titanic's construction. It was before its unique, irregularly spaced B-deck suites were actually built out. It wasn't the Olympic in disguise at all. It was literally just the Titanic before the carpenters had finished doing their jobs. The greatest piece of myth in this whole theory was simply a total misunderstanding of a construction timeline. Case closed.
You know, I want us to just slow down for a moment here, because beneath the thrill of a billionaire's conspiracy, beneath the debated photographs and the yard numbers, there is a very real, staggering human toll. 1,500 men, women, and children froze to death or drowned in the pitch-black waters of the North Atlantic. It remains one of the most heartbreaking, devastating tragedies of the 20th century. And when we turn their final moments into some cheap spy thriller, we really risk losing sight of the very real people who suffered that night. Because the reality is, the Titanic didn't sink because of an elaborate corporate scheme. It sank from a devastating cocktail of human arrogance and entirely preventable mistakes. It was driven at excessive speeds through a known ice field in the dead of night. It was sent out to sea with barely enough lifeboats for half the people on board, simply because the designers thought too many boats cluttered up the beautiful deck. It was a massive failure of leadership, a failure of safety regulations, and a catastrophic chain of negligence.
So, if the evidence for the switch is completely debunked by the physical wreck and just plain logic, why do we keep talking about it? Why does this specific theory endure over a century later? Honestly, it comes down to human psychology. As humans, we desperately reach for a mastermind or a villain to blame. It is somehow so much easier for our brains to process a grand, evil plan cooked up by a greedy billionaire than it is to accept the chaotic, senseless nature of reality.
Because, truth be told, the reality is terrifying. To accept that the greatest, most technologically advanced marvel of its era could be completely destroyed by simple, banal human error, that is deeply unsettling. It means that no matter how much steel we build, no matter how much luxury we surround ourselves with, we are still incredibly vulnerable. Sometimes, the most horrifying truth of all is that there was no master plan. There was no orchestrated plot. Nobody was really in control at all. We reach for meaning in the face of immense tragedy. We want the dots to connect even when they just don't. So I want to leave you with this to think about. When we look back at a disaster as monumental and heartbreaking as the Titanic, is believing in a cold, calculated conspiracy actually more comforting than admitting that a series of foolish human mistakes caused so much pain? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the evidence, and I'll see you in the next explainer.